Look, I'm going to be completely honest with you about this whole thing because, honestly, I don't care anymore who hears what I have to say. I'm Gabby. I'm 24, and this story is about how I supposedly ruined the best thing I ever had, though I still think everyone's being way too dramatic about it. So, I was working part-time at this place. Nothing fancy, just paying my bills while living with two roommates who were constantly in my business. I met Randall at this house party my friend threw, and right away, I knew he was different from the usual guys I'd been dealing with. He was 26, just started this new job, and he had that whole sweet, stable thing going for him that honestly made me think, okay, this could actually go somewhere. He wasn't trying to get in my pants within 5 minutes of meeting me. He actually listened when I talked, and he had his life together, in a way that was really attractive. Between us, I'd been dealing with way too many losers who couldn't even keep a job or remember to text me back. So finding someone who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me felt like hitting the jackpot. The thing is, I've always been smart about relationships, and I knew that if I wanted Randall to see me as more than just another hookup, I had to play it differently. I'd learned from experience that guys don't value what they get too easily. So I decided from the start that we were going to take things slow. When he'd lean in for more than just kissing, I'd pull back and give him this speech about how I wanted our relationship to be special and meaningful, not like all these other shallow connections I'd had before. I could see it frustrated him sometimes, but I also saw how it made him try harder, how he'd plan these thoughtful dates and really put effort into showing me he was serious. In my head, I was being strategic about building something real, something that would last. I told him I wanted to wait because he was special to me, because what we had deserved more than just rushing into things physically. And honestly, part of me really believed that. Randall represented everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Stability, kindness, someone who would actually stick around and treat me right. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is the part everyone freaks out about, even though it's really not that big of a deal. I'd been talking to this other guy, Jackson, for a few months before I even met Randall. We'd matched on some dating app, and it was clear from the start that neither of us was looking for anything serious. Jackson was 28, confident in this way that was honestly pretty intoxicating, and he was straightforward about what he wanted. No games, no pretending it was going to turn into something more, just good chemistry and fun times when we both felt like it. I'm not going to apologize for having needs and wanting different things from different people. With Jackson, it was purely physical attraction and excitement. With Randall, it was about building something real and lasting. I didn't see why I couldn't have both while I figured out what I actually wanted long-term. People act like I was being some evil mastermind, but honestly, Randall and I weren't exclusive yet, and what he didn't know wasn't hurting anyone. I genuinely thought I was being smart about the whole situation, keeping my options open while still investing in what could be a really good relationship. Looking back, I still don't think I was wrong for exploring what was available to me before making any big commitments. I mean, we weren't married or even officially together yet, so technically I wasn't doing anything wrong. The way I saw it, I was taking time to really figure out what I wanted, instead of just jumping into something serious without being sure. That's actually the mature thing to do, right? Making sure you're ready for commitment before you commit. I was protecting both of us from getting into something we weren't ready for. And honestly, the physical stuff with Jackson was keeping me from putting pressure on Randall, which was actually good for our emotional connection. I could focus on building something real with him without getting distracted by physical frustration or needs that he wasn't ready to meet yet. In a way, I was doing us both a favor by handling things the way I did. So for about a month, I had this whole system worked out, and honestly, it was kind of perfect for what I needed at the time. Randall would take me on these really nice dates, we'd have these deep conversations about our futures and what we wanted in life, and I'd let him think he was slowly winning me over by being such a gentleman. Meanwhile, whenever I was feeling that physical frustration or just wanted some excitement, I'd text Jackson and we'd meet up. It usually happened late at night, when Randall thought I was having girls' nights with my roommates or just staying in. I'd tell Randall I was tired or had an early morning, kiss him goodnight, and then go handle my business elsewhere. The way I saw it, I was getting the best of both worlds without anyone getting hurt. Randall was getting the emotional connection and romance he seemed to want, and I was taking care of my physical needs without putting pressure on our developing relationship. When Randall would get frustrated about our physical boundaries, which happened more often than I liked, I'd turn it around on him and make him feel guilty for even bringing it up. I'd give him these speeches about how disappointed I was that he was focusing on intimacy instead of appreciating the emotional connection we were building. I'd bring up stories about guys from my past who had pressured me or only wanted one thing, and I'd watch him scramble to prove he wasn't like that. Between us, I knew exactly what I was doing, and it worked every single time. He'd apologize for making me feel pressured and promise he was happy to wait as long as I needed. The thing is, I really did care about Randall, and I really did see a future with him. That's why I was being so careful about how we progressed physically. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just another girl he could sleep with and forget about. I was relationship material, wife material even, and that required a different approach. With Jackson, there were no expectations or emotions involved, so it didn't feel like it counted the same way. I wasn't building a life with Jackson or planning a future with him. He was just scratching an itch while I focused on creating something meaningful with Randall. I'd spend hours texting Randall about our plans for the weekend or talking about places we wanted to travel together, really investing in building that emotional foundation. Then I'd slip away for a few hours with Jackson and come back ready to be the perfect girlfriend again. I felt like I was handling everything really maturely, keeping different aspects of my life in their proper compartments. I never mixed the two situations or let them interfere with each other. Randall was getting the best version of me emotionally, and that's what mattered for building a real relationship. I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing by taking our physical relationship seriously and not rushing into it just because I was getting those needs met elsewhere. Plus, it's not like I was lying to Randall about anything important. I just wasn't telling him every detail about my life, which is normal when you're still getting to know someone. Everyone has parts of their past that they don't share immediately. And I don't think that makes me dishonest or manipulative, like everyone keeps saying. After about a month of this arrangement, Randall brought up the exclusivity talk, and I knew it was time to make a decision. Honestly, I was ready to commit to him because he'd proven himself to be everything I was looking for in a long-term partner. But I also wasn't quite ready to cut things off with Jackson immediately, so I decided to see him one last time before officially closing that chapter. I figured what Randall didn't know about something that happened right before we became exclusive couldn't hurt him. And technically, I wasn't cheating since we hadn't had that conversation yet. So I met up with Jackson the night before Randall and I were supposed to have our relationship talk. And I told myself it was my way of saying goodbye to that chapter of my life. Looking back, maybe the timing wasn't perfect, but I don't think it was as horrible as everyone made it out to be. Once Randall and I became official, I was completely committed to him and cut off all contact with Jackson. Well, mostly. I mean, we'd still like each other's social media posts sometimes, but that's just being friendly, not carrying on an affair. The problem was that once we were exclusive, I started noticing things about Randall that bothered me, and I found myself keeping track of all the little ways he wasn't measuring up to what I expected from a boyfriend. Like, I was putting all this effort into planning our dates and making sure we had quality time together. But he'd get distracted by work calls or want to hang out with his friends instead of focusing on me. I started testing him in small ways, showing up a little late to see if he'd wait, canceling plans at the last minute to see how he'd react, being less available to see if he'd chase me more. I needed to know that he valued me and our relationship enough to fight for it. When he started his new job, everything got worse because suddenly he had all these new people in his life and stories about work that didn't include me. He seemed happier and more confident, which should have been good, but it actually made me feel insecure because I wasn't the center of his world anymore. I'd make little comments about how he was changing or how work seemed more important to him than I was, and when he'd try to reassure me, I'd act like he was overreacting. I'd say things like, "I'm just saying, you used to prioritize our time together more," or "I guess I know where I stand compared to your career." When he'd get upset about these comments, I'd tell him he was being too sensitive and that I was just trying to communicate my needs. I honestly thought I was being reasonable by letting him know when his behavior was affecting me, but apparently everyone thinks I was being manipulative. I don't see how expressing your feelings and needs in a relationship is manipulative. But whatever. I was just trying to make sure we stayed connected and that he didn't start taking me for granted like so many guys do once they think they have you locked down. I wanted him to keep putting in effort and showing me that I was important to him. And I don't think that's asking too much from someone who claims to love you. Everything started falling apart when Randall got excited about this new friendship he'd made at work and kept talking about wanting me to meet this guy. At first, I was just annoyed because I felt like he was prioritizing some random coworker over quality time with me. But then he mentioned the guy's name was Jackson, and my stomach literally dropped. I tried to play it cool and suggested that maybe we weren't ready to start mixing our friend groups yet, that we should focus on strengthening our own relationship first. But Randall was being really persistent about it, going on and on about how great this guy was and how he thought we'd all get along really well. Between us, I was freaking out internally, but trying to figure out how to handle the situation without raising any red flags. I couldn't exactly forbid him from bringing his coworker around without looking controlling and crazy, but I also couldn't let them compare notes about me. I spent the next few days trying to talk him out of it, suggesting we do double dates with other couples instead, or that maybe we should wait until we'd been together longer before introducing work friends. But Randall had already invited Jackson over for dinner at his place, where I basically lived most nights anyway, and he was so excited about it that backing out would have looked suspicious. I considered faking being sick that night, but I realized that would just delay the inevitable and probably make things worse. So I spent the whole day before the dinner trying to prepare for every possible scenario. I came up with explanations for how Jackson and I might know each other casually, ways to deflect if he brought up anything specific, and backup stories about old mutual friends or whatever. In my head, I was hoping Jackson would just play along and not make things weird, since he'd never seemed interested in drama or causing problems before. I even practiced looking surprised and polite when I met him for the first time. The day of the dinner, I spent extra time getting ready, doing my makeup perfectly, and wearing this dress that Randall always said was his favorite. I figured if I looked amazing and played the perfect girlfriend role, I could control the situation and maybe even make Jackson regret that we never tried to make things serious. I was planning to be charming and sweet, maybe even make some subtle comments about how happy Randall and I were together, just to establish where everyone stood. Honestly, I thought I could handle whatever happened and come out looking like the innocent party in all of it. I mean, what was Jackson going to do? Announce to Randall that we used to hook up? That would make him look bad too, so I figured he'd have just as much reason to keep quiet about our history. I was actually kind of excited to see him again, if I'm being completely honest, because I wanted to show him what he'd missed out on by not wanting anything serious with me. The dinner was a complete disaster from the moment Jackson walked through the door. I could tell he recognized me immediately, and instead of playing it cool like I was hoping, he had this smirk on his face like he thought the whole situation was amusing. I tried to act like we were meeting for the first time, extending my hand and giving him this bright smile while saying how nice it was to finally meet Randall's new friend. But Jackson just looked at me with this knowing expression and said something like, "Actually, we've met before. Haven't we, Gabby?" And my heart started racing. I tried to laugh it off and act confused, saying maybe we'd run into each other around town or something, but then he started getting more specific about where we'd met and when. He mentioned the dating app, our first meetup, even details about my apartment that made it obvious we'd spent time there together. I could see Randall's expression changing as he started putting the pieces together, especially when Jackson casually mentioned that we'd been seeing each other pretty regularly until recently. The whole time this was happening, I was trying to send Jackson signals to stop talking, but he seemed to be enjoying himself way too much to care about making things awkward. When Randall finally asked directly what was going on, I went into full damage control mode. I tried to minimize everything, saying that Jackson and I had maybe hung out a few times, but it was never anything serious, just casual friendship stuff. I kept emphasizing that it was all in the past, before Randall and I had even met, which wasn't technically true, but felt like the safest version of events. But Jackson wasn't having any of my revisionist history and started correcting my timeline, pointing out that we'd been seeing each other well into the time when Randall and I were dating. That's when Randall got quiet in this way that honestly scared me more than if he'd started yelling. He asked me directly if I'd been intimate with Jackson while we were dating, and I could feel everything falling apart. I tried to turn it around on him, asking why he was interrogating me like this and making me feel like I was on trial. I started crying and telling him that this felt like he was attacking me instead of trusting me, that he was letting some jealous insecurity ruin what we had built together. I brought up how he'd always been suspicious of my friendships with guys and suggested that this was just him looking for an excuse to not trust me. When that didn't work and he kept pushing for honest answers, I got angry and accused him of setting me up, claiming he must have known about Jackson and me before inviting him over and that this whole dinner was some kind of trap to humiliate me. I told him that if he really loved me, he would trust me and focus on our future, instead of obsessing over some meaningless thing from my past. I reminded him that we weren't even exclusive when it happened, so technically, I hadn't done anything wrong. But he just kept looking at me like I was some stranger. And I could tell that nothing I said was going to fix this situation. After that dinner exploded, and Randall asked me to leave so he could think about things. I honestly expected him to come crawling back within a couple of days, once he'd had time to cool down and miss me. I mean, we'd built something real together, and I figured once he got past his wounded pride, he'd realize that what happened with Jackson before we were official didn't actually change anything about our relationship. So I played it smart and didn't blow up his phone or go chasing after him like some desperate girl. Instead, I posted some photos of myself looking amazing on social media, went out with friends, and basically showed him that I was doing just fine without him, while giving him space to realize what he was throwing away. But then days turned into a week, and I found out he'd blocked me on everything: Instagram, Facebook, even my phone number. When I tried to go to his place to talk things out like adults, my key didn't work anymore, which meant he'd actually changed the locks. That's when I started getting really angry, because he was being completely childish and overdramatic about the whole situation. I tried reaching out through mutual friends, but they all started acting weird around me and making excuses for why they couldn't help me get in touch with him. Then I found out that he'd told everyone our business, painting me like some cheating villain instead of just explaining the situation like a mature person would. People who used to be my friends started treating me differently, like I was this horrible person instead of someone who'd just made some questionable timing decisions before being in an exclusive relationship. The worst part was finding out that Jackson had been talking about our whole history at their workplace, telling people details about our relationship and making me sound manipulative and dishonest. I couldn't even go to my own job without feeling like people were whispering about me, because apparently word travels fast in this town. My roommates, who used to help me cover when I needed alibis for seeing Jackson, suddenly started acting like I was this huge liability and asked me to move out because they didn't want to be associated with drama. Even trying to date new people became impossible because my reputation had been completely destroyed in our social circle. Guys who used to hit on me constantly were suddenly treating me like I had some kind of disease, and the few who did show interest clearly just wanted to see if I was as easy as everyone was saying. It was like everyone had forgotten that I was a human being with feelings and just decided to write me off based on one situation that didn't even fully understand. Nobody bothered to ask for my side of the story, or consider that maybe Randall was being unreasonable by refusing to forgive me for something that happened before we were even exclusive. They all just took his word for it, that I was this terrible person who couldn't be trusted. Which honestly says more about them than it does about me. 6 months later, I ran into Randall at this restaurant downtown, and seeing him was like getting punched in the stomach. He looked incredible, like he'd been working out more, his hair was different, and he just had this confident energy that honestly made him more attractive than he'd ever been when we were together. But the worst part was that he wasn't alone. He was with this woman who was clearly his new girlfriend, and she was everything I'm not. Shorter, brunette, wearing this simple outfit that somehow looked perfect on her. You could tell just by watching them together that she worshipped the ground he walked on, laughing at everything he said, and looking at him like he was the most amazing man in the world. They were sitting close together, sharing food, completely absorbed in each other, and it was obvious that he was happier with her than he'd ever been with me. The really messed up part is that I could see he'd gotten a promotion at work because he was wearing nicer clothes and seemed more successful overall. Everything about his life had improved after he left me, while I was still stuck in the same patterns that had driven him away in the first place. I watched them for a few minutes from across the restaurant, and it was clear that she was giving him everything I never did. Complete attention, obvious affection, and probably no games or complications. She looked at him like he hung the moon, and he was eating it up, being more charming and animated than I'd ever seen him. It made me sick to see how easily he'd replaced me with someone who was probably boring as hell, but knew how to stroke his ego in all the right ways. I wanted to go over there and remind him of everything we'd shared, all the deep conversations and emotional connection that he'd thrown away over something so stupid. But I knew that would just make me look pathetic, and honestly, seeing them together made me realize that maybe we were never as compatible as I thought we were. She seemed perfectly content to be his little cheerleader, hanging on his every word and probably never challenging him or making him work for anything. If that's what he wanted, then good for him, I guess. But honestly, after everything that happened, I realized that Randall was just too sensitive and insecure to handle being with someone like me. He couldn't appreciate that I was trying to build something real with him, and he chose to focus on ancient history instead of what we could have had together. If he was the kind of person who would throw away everything we built over something that happened before we were even exclusive, then maybe he wasn't as mature as I thought he was. I deserve someone who can handle my past without making it into this huge dramatic production. Someone who trusts me enough to focus on our future, instead of obsessing over things that don't even matter anymore. The fact that he moved on so quickly just proves that what we had wasn't as special to him as it was to me. And honestly, I'm better off finding someone who can appreciate what I bring to a relationship instead of someone who's going to abandon me the first time things get complicated. At least now I know that he was never really the right person for me anyway, because the right person wouldn't have given up on us so easily. And that girl he's with now? She's probably just settling for being with someone who's clearly still hung up on his ex. Because why else would he have moved on so fast? She has no idea what she's getting herself into with someone who's obviously that emotionally immature and unable to handle real adult relationships. I almost feel sorry for her, actually, because she's probably going to find out eventually that he's not as perfect as he seems when you first meet him. But whatever, that's her problem now, not mine.